Rain pounded the darkened streets as Sarah peered out her window, heart pounding. She clutched the envelope in her hand. The outrageous $100,000 fine from the Homeowners Association. It was the last straw. Her knuckles turned white with rage. This war was about to get personal. Sarah had moved into the prestigious Oakwood Estates a year ago, lured by the promise of a pristine community and lavish amenities. But the HOA's iron grip quickly tightened, and she found herself navigating a minefield of petty rules, exorbitant fees, and underhanded tactics. When she protested the removal of her small vegetable garden, citing the HOA's own guidelines, it responded with this six-figure penalty. Supposedly, her garden disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. It was laughable. A blatant abuse of power to keep residents in line through fear and intimidation. But Sarah was no pushover. A former litigator, she knew the HOA's weaknesses intimately. Tonight, she would put that knowledge to the test. With the fine looming, she had little choice but to go to war. Grabbing her laptop, Sarah quickly accessed the HOA's financial records, which she had painstakingly hacked into weeks ago. Her eyes narrowed as she pieced together a disturbing pattern of embezzlement, bribery, and fraudulent contracts. The HOA board was lining their pockets at the expense of the very homeowners they were supposed to serve. A slight smile crept across Sarah's face. She had them right where she wanted them. Hurrying to her car, Sarah drove to the HOA office, navigating the deserted, rain-soaked streets. The building stood ominous and forbidding, its facade illuminated by flickering security lights. Glancing around cautiously, she slipped inside, her footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Making her way to the main office, Sarah found the door locked. With a few deft movements, she picked the lock and pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit room. She quickly located the safe, cracked the combination, and retrieved the incriminating files she needed. Just then, the office door slammed shut behind her. Sarah whirled around to see the HOA president, Andrew Carlson, standing there, his arms crossed over his chest. Well, he said, his voice dripping with menace. Look what the cat dragged in. I knew you were trouble the moment you moved in, Sarah. But I never expected you to stoop to outright theft. Sarah refused to be intimidated. I'm not the thief here, Andrew, she retorted. Your entire board is corrupt, lining your pockets at the expense of the homeowners. I have the evidence to prove it. Andrew's eyes narrowed. Is that so? And what exactly do you plan to do with that information? Blackmail us? He took a step closer, his gaze burning into her. You know, we take a very dim view of those who try to undermine the HOA. Perhaps it's time we teach you a lesson. Sarah's heart raced, but she refused to back down. Go ahead and try, she said, her voice steady. Because if anything happens to me, those files will be released to the authorities and the media. You and your cronies will be ruined. The two adversaries stared each other down, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The future of Oakwood Estates and Sarah's very life hung in the balance. The standoff in the HOA office was palpable, the air thick with tension. Sarah and Andrew glared at each other, neither willing to back down. You've got a lot of nerve coming in here and stealing our private files, Andrew growled, his eyes narrowing. Do you have any idea what kind of power the HOA wields in this community? Sarah refused to be cowed. I know exactly what kind of power you have, she retorted, her voice laced with contempt. And that's precisely why I had to take matters into my own hands. Your board is corrupt, Andrew, and I have the evidence to prove it. Andrew let out a harsh laugh. Prove it? You really think anyone's going to believe the word of a troublemaker like you over the respected members of the HOA? He took a step closer, his expression darkening. Face it, Sarah, you're outmatched. No one's going to listen to your little conspiracy theories. Oh, I think they will, Sarah said, a small smile playing on her lips. Especially when I release those files to the media. Your little empire is going to come crashing down around you. Andrew's face paled, and Sarah knew she had struck a nerve. You wouldn't dare, he hissed. Try me, Sarah shot back. I've got nothing to lose, Andrew. You've made my life a living hell ever since I moved in. But now, the tables have turned. The two adversaries stared each other down, the tension palpable. Finally, Andrew let out a defeated sigh and raised his hands in surrender. All right, you win. For now, he glared at Sarah, his eyes smoldering with barely concealed rage. But don't think this is over. The HOA has ways of dealing with people like you. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to show any fear. I'll be ready, she said, her voice steady. With that, she turned and left the HOA office, her heart pounding. She knew that she had just taken on a powerful enemy, but she was determined to see this through. As she made her way back to her car, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced around nervously, but the deserted streets offered no clues. Shaking off her unease, she got in her car and drove home, the incriminating files safely tucked away. Once inside, Sarah quickly logged onto her computer and began poring over the documents. The The more she uncovered, the more horrified she became. The HOA board had been skimming funds, awarding lucrative contracts to friends and family, and even using intimidation tactics to silence dissenting homeowners. Sarah's hands trembled as she pieced together the full scope of the corruption. This was no small-time scandal. It was a massive, wide-ranging operation that had been going on for years. She knew she had to act fast. The HOA wouldn't take kindly to her meddling, and she had no doubt they would try to retaliate. But she also knew that she couldn't back down, not when she had the power to bring the entire corrupt system crashing down. Taking a deep breath, Sarah began to formulate her plan. She would need to carefully navigate the legal minefield using the HOA's own rules and regulations against them. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to see it through. As the rain continued to pelt the windows, Sarah steeled herself for the battle ahead. This was no longer just about her vegetable garden, it was about exposing the truth and holding the HOA accountable for their misdeeds. And she was more than ready to take them on. The next morning, Sarah woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent the night meticulously reviewing the HOA's financial records, mapping out her strategy. It was time to go on the offensive. Grabbing the incriminating files, she headed to the local news station, determined to expose the HOA's corruption for all to see. The reporter, a seasoned veteran named Emily, listened intently as Sarah laid out the evidence. "This is explosive stuff," Emily said, her eyes widening. "If even half of this is true, the HOA board is in serious trouble." "It's all true," Sarah insisted, her voice firm. "I've been documenting their misdeeds for months, and I have the receipts to prove it." Emily nodded, her expression serious. "All right, let's get to work. We'll need to verify everything, of course, but if this checks out, we'll run the story as soon as possible." As Sarah left the news station, she felt a surge of adrenaline. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back now. The HOA's reign of terror was about to come to an end. But as she drove home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. She glanced in her rearview mirror, but the streets were empty. Still, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Once inside her house, Sarah quickly secured the doors and windows, her heart pounding. She knew the HOA wouldn't take this lying down. They would do whatever it took to silence her. Just then, her phone rang. It was the reporter, Emily. "Sarah, you need to get out of there right now," she said, her voice urgent. "I just got a call from a source inside the HOA. They're on their way to your house to have a talk with you." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What? How could they have found out so quickly?" "I don't know, but you need to leave now," Emily insisted. "I'll call the police, but you need to get to a safe place." Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her keys and ran out the door, her heart racing. She jumped in her car and sped away, her mind racing with possibilities. Had the HOA bugged her house? Were they monitoring her every move? As she drove, Sarah tried to think of a safe place to go. She couldn't risk leading the HOA goons straight to the news station, and her own home was obviously compromised. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She knew just the place, a small, out-of-the-way cafe where she used to meet her old law partner, Jack. It was off the grid, and the owner was a close friend and could be trusted. Pulling into the cafe's parking lot, Sarah quickly hurried inside, her eyes darting around nervously. The place was empty, save for the friendly proprietor, who greeted her with a warm smile. "Sarah, my dear, what brings you here on such a dreary day?" the older woman asked. "I'm in trouble, Mrs. Perez," Sarah said, her voice low. "The HOA, they're after me. I need a place to hide, just for a little while." Mrs. Perez's eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. "Of course, my dear. Come, you can stay in the back room. No one will think to look for you here." As Sarah followed the kind woman to the secluded back room, she let out a shaky breath. She was safe for now, but she knew the HOA wouldn't give up that easily. This was just the calm before the storm. Holed up in the back room in the cafe, Sarah tried to collect her thoughts. She knew the HOA would be relentless in their pursuit, and she needed to stay one step ahead. Pulling out her phone, she called Emily, the news reporter. "Sarah, thank goodness you're safe," Emily said, her voice laced with relief. "I've notified the police about the HOA's threats, but you need to be careful. These people play dirty." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice tense. "That's why I'm laying low for now. But I need you to keep digging into that financial evidence. We need to build an ironclad case against them." "You got it," Emily assured her. "My team is on it. We'll make sure the whole world knows what the HOA has been up to." After ending the call, Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She knew that once the news story broke, the HOA would be in full damage control mode. They would do anything to discredit her and bury the story. Just then, the door to the back room creaked open and Mrs. Perez poked her head in. "Sarah, dear, are you all right?" the older woman asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "As all right as I can be, given the circumstances," Sarah replied with a weary smile. "Thank you again for letting me hide out here. I know I'm putting you in a difficult position." Mrs. Perez waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, my dear. You know I'd do anything for you. Besides, those dreadful HOA people don't scare me one bit." She grinned mischievously. "In fact, I have a few tricks up my sleeve that might just help you out." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mrs. Perez, what are you planning?" The older woman's eyes twinkled. "You just leave that to me, my dear. In the meantime, I'll make you a nice cup of tea to help you relax." As Mrs. Perez bustled off to the kitchen, Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. If anyone could outwit the HOA, it was the Feisty Cafe owner. While she waited, Sarah decided to take a closer look at the financial records she had stolen from the HOA office. The more she studied them, the more patterns she began to see: suspicious payments, inflated invoices, and a web of shell companies that seemed to be funneling money out of the HOA's coffers. Just then, her phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this. I just got a tip that the HOA board is holding an emergency meeting tonight. Something big is going down." Sarah's heart raced. "Do you know what it's about?" "No, but my source says it's being kept top secret," Emily replied. "I'm going to try to get someone inside to record it. This could be a major break for us." "Be careful, Emily," Sarah warned. "The HOA is already after me. I don't want them coming after you, too." "Don't worry, I've got it covered," Emily assured her. "Just focus on staying safe, okay? I'll be in touch as soon as I have something." As Sarah ended the call, Mrs. Perez returned with a steaming mug of tea. "Drink up, my dear," the older woman said, handing it to her. "You're going to need your strength for the battle ahead." Sarah took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through her body. Whatever happened at that HOA meeting, she knew she had to be ready. This war was just getting started. The tension in the HOA boardroom was palpable as the members gathered for their emergency meeting. Andrew Carlson, the HOA president, stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. "All right, everyone, thank you for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice terse. "I'm sure you're all aware of the situation with Sarah Prescott." A murmur of discontent rippled through the room. Sarah Prescott had become a thorn in the HOA's side, challenging their authority at every turn. "As you know, she's been snooping around trying to uncover evidence of our activities," Andrew continued, his eyes narrowing. "And it appears she's managed to get her hands on some sensitive documents." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their faces etched with concern. "Now we can't allow this to go any further," Andrew declared, his voice rising. "Sarah Prescott has become a threat to this entire community, and we need to deal with her permanently." A hush fell over the room as the gravity of his words sank in. Several of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none dared to speak up. "I've already taken steps to have her neutralized," Andrew continued, a cold smile spreading across his face. "But I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. This needs to be handled discreetly and efficiently. We can't afford any slip-ups." The board members nodded, their expressions grim. They knew the stakes were high. If Sarah Prescott's allegations were to become public, it would spell the end of their reign over Oakwood Estates. Just then, a lone voice spoke up from the back of the room. "Are we really going to stoop to murder?" the board member asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Isn't that a bit extreme?" Andrew's eyes narrowed, and he fixed the dissenter with a cold, calculating stare. "Do you have a better idea, Jenkins?" he snapped. "Because if you can't get on board with this, then you're of no use to us." The board member, Jenkins, swallowed hard, his face pale. "I am just saying maybe we should consider a more legal approach." "You know, miscredit her or something." Andrew let out a harsh laugh. "Legal approach? Are you kidding me? That ship has sailed, Jenkins. Sarah Prescott has us dead to rights, and she's got the evidence to prove it. We can't afford to take any chances here." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "This is about the survival of the HOA, gentlemen, and I, for one, am not willing to let everything we've built come crashing down because of one meddlesome homeowner. Are you?" The other board members shifted uncomfortably, their expressions conflicted. They knew that Andrew was right, the stakes were too high to take any chances, but the idea of resorting to murder was a line that many of them were reluctant to cross. Sensing their hesitation, Andrew pressed on. "Look, I already set the wheels in motion. All we need to do is make sure it's done quickly and quietly. No loose ends, no mistakes. This is the only way to protect our community and our way of life." One by one, the board members nodded, their faces etched with a resigned acceptance. They had come too far to back down now. As the meeting adjourned, Andrew Carlson smiled, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Sarah Prescott had made her last mistake. This war was about to take a very, very dark turn. Back at the cafe, Sarah sipped her tea, her mind racing. The news for Emily had set off alarm bells, and she knew she needed to act fast. Just then, the door to the back room creaked open, and Mrs. Perez poked her head in. "Sarah, dear, you have a visitor," she said, her voice hushed. "A young man named Jack. He says he's an old friend of yours." Sarah's heart leaped. "Jack? Send him in, please." Moments later, her former law partner stepped into the room, his expression grave. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice low. "Emily called me, said you were in trouble with the HOA." Sarah quickly filled him in on the details, watching as Jack's face darkened with each passing moment. "Those bastards," he growled, clenching his fists. "I knew they were crooked, but this is a whole new level of corruption." "I know," Sarah said, her voice tense. "And it's only going to get worse. The HOA board is holding an emergency meeting tonight, and Emily's source says they're planning something drastic." Jack's eyes widened. "Drastic? You don't think they'd, actually try to get rid of you, do you?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm not sure, but I can't take any chances. That's why I need your help, Jack. I need you to get that financial evidence to the authorities. Make sure it gets into the right hands." "Consider it done," Jack said, his expression resolute. "But what about you? You can't just sit here and wait for them to come after you." Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm not going to. I'm going to that meeting, Jack. I need to confront them face to face." "Are you out of your mind?" Jack exclaimed. "Sarah, these people are dangerous. They're not going to hesitate to hurt you or worse." "I know the risks, Jack," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But I can't just sit back and let them get away with this. I have to try." Jack shook his head, clearly worried. "All right, but I'm not letting you go in there alone. I'm coming with you." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Jack cut her off. "No arguments, Sarah. You're my best friend, and I'm not going to let you face those psychopaths by yourself. We're in this together." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude, and she pulled Jack into a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. As they broke apart, Mrs. Perez poked her head back into the room. "Everything all right, you two?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "As all right as it can be, Mrs. Perez," Sarah replied. "Jack and I are going to the HOA meeting tonight. We need to confront them once and for all." The older woman's eyes widened. "Are you sure that's wise, my dear? Those people are dangerous." "I know, but I have to try," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "I can't let them get away with this." Mrs. Perez studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But please be careful, both of you." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small object. "And take this with you, just in case." Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the object, a small but powerful stun gun. "Mrs. Perez, I can't," she began, but the older woman waved her off. "No arguments, my dear. You may need it, and I'd rather you have it and not need it than need it and not have it." With a grateful nod, Sarah pocketed the stun gun, knowing that she and Jack were going to need all the help they could get. The stage was set for a showdown at the HOA meeting, and Sarah was determined to come out on top. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with tension as Sarah and Jack made their way to the HOA office. The flickering streetlights cast an eerie glow over the deserted streets, adding to the sense of foreboding. As they approached the building, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she was walking into the lion's den, but she was determined to stand her ground. Exchanging a brief glance with Jack, she took a deep breath and pushed open the door, stepping into the dimly lit lobby. The HOA board members were already assembled, their expressions grim. Andrew Carlson, the president, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Well, if it isn't the troublemaker and her sidekick," he sneered. "I must say, I'm surprised you had the nerve to show your face here, Sarah." Sarah refused to be cowed. "Cut the crap, Andrew," she snapped. "We know what you and your cronies have been up to, and we're not going to let you get away with it." Andrew let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, really? And what exactly do you think you're going to do about it?" "We have the evidence," Andrew, Jack interjected, his voice steady. "The financial records, the bribery, the embezzlement. It's all there. We're going to expose your corruption for the whole world to see." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their faces etched with worry. "You don't have the guts, Prescott," Andrew spat. "You think you can just waltz in here and take us down? We run this community and we'll do whatever it takes to protect it." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to back down. "Is that a threat, Andrew?" she challenged, her voice dripping with contempt. Andrew's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, it's much more than that, my dear. You see, we've already taken steps to ensure your silence." Suddenly, the doors behind Sarah and Jack burst open, and a group of burly men in dark suits rushed in, their hands reaching for their weapons. "What's the meaning of this?" Jack demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Meet my personal security team," Andrew said, his expression smug. "They'll be escorting you two out of here permanently." The security guards advanced, their hands on their guns. Sarah felt her heart racing, but she refused to show any fear. Quickly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the stun gun that Mrs. Perez had given her. In one swift motion, she fired it at the nearest guard, who crumpled to the ground, his muscles spasming. The other guards hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected attack. Sarah and Jack seized the opportunity, quickly making their way towards the exit. "You'll never get away with this, Carlson," Sarah shouted over her shoulder, her voice laced with defiance. Andrew's face contorted with rage. "We'll see about that, Prescott," he yelled, his voice echoing through the lobby. As Sarah and Jack burst out into the night, they could hear the sound of sirens in the distance. Clearly, Mrs. Perez had called the police. "That was a close one," Jack panted, his eyes wide with adrenaline. "Too close," Sarah agreed, her heart still pounding. "But we're not done yet. We need to get that evidence to the authorities, and fast." With a determined nod, the two friends hurried to Jack's car, their minds racing with the implications of what they had just witnessed. The HOA's corruption ran deeper than they could have imagined, and they knew that the battle was far from over. As they sped away, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The HOA had shown their true colors, and she was more determined than ever to bring them down. In the aftermath of the confrontation at the HOA office, Sarah and Jack worked tirelessly to ensure that the incriminating evidence they had gathered made its way into the right hands. They met with the local authorities, providing detailed accounts of the HOA's illegal activities and handing over the financial records and other documents. The police were initially skeptical, but as they delved deeper into the information, they quickly realized the gravity of the situation. "This is a massive cover-up," the lead detective said, his eyes widening. "The HOA board has been embezzling funds, awarding fraudulent contracts, and even using intimidation tactics to silence homeowners. We're talking about millions of dollars in misappropriated funds." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I know, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. They're willing to go to any lengths to protect their power and their profits." The detective let out a frustrated sigh. "Well, you two have certainly stirred up a hornet's nest. This is going to be a complex and delicate investigation, but we're going to make sure these crooks are held accountable." As the investigation unfolded, the media caught wind of the story, and it quickly became a national sensation. The HOA's dirty laundry was aired for all to see, and the public outcry was deafening. The Oakwood Estates community was in an uproar, with homeowners demanding accountability and reform. Suddenly, the once untouchable HOA board found themselves on the defensive, scrambling to salvage their reputations. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah and Jack remained vigilant, providing the authorities with any and all information they needed to build their case. They knew that the HOA wouldn't go down without a fight, and they were prepared for the long haul. Then, one fateful day, the hammer finally fell. The HOA board members were arrested, charged with a litany of crimes ranging from fraud to racketeering. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief, finally free from the oppressive grip of the corrupt organization. As the dust settled, Sarah and Jack stood side by side, surveying the aftermath. "Can you believe it?" Jack said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it. We took down the HOA." Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I never doubted we could, Jack. Not for a second." "And what about that $100,000 fine they hit you with?" Jack asked, his eyes twinkling. "I'd say you more than even the score, wouldn't you?" Sarah let out a laugh. "Oh, you bet I did. The judge ordered the HOA to pay back every single penny, plus additional damages. They're going to be feeling the sting of that for a long time." The two friends embraced, their laughter echoing through the streets of Oakwood Estates. The community had been through a harrowing ordeal, but they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. As for Sarah, she had proven that even the mightiest of foes could be brought down as long as you had the determination and the courage to fight back. "So what's next for you, Miss Prescott?" Jack asked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. "Well, I was thinking of running for the HOA board. You have to make sure this never happens again." Jack's eyes widened. "You're kidding, right?" Sarah shook her head, her smile widening. "Nope. I figure it's the best way to keep an eye on things. Make sure the new board stays honest and transparent." Jack let out a low whistle. "Wow, Sarah, you really don't do things by halves, do you?" "Nope," Sarah replied, her voice filled with determination. "And this time, I'm going to make sure the HOA works for the people, not against them." As the sun began to set over Oakwood Estates, Sarah knew that her battle was far from over. But she was more than ready to take on the challenge, armed with the knowledge that even the mightiest of foes could be toppled one strategic maneuver at a time.